On a white background, one by one dark blue letters appear forming the text "The Collective Impact Project presents." The titles fade. Again, one by one dark blue lettering appears forming the text "Making Room for Change." The word change is in a lighter blue. Titles fade. In between two sets of two horizontal lines, one blue, one yellow, the title appears "Disability Human Rights Cases in Canada." The title disappears and the video opens with a head and shoulder shot of Elliot.
In this video, we examine the history of the Canadian disability human rights movement, the challenges faced, the victories, and the milestones.
A photo appears on screen of Justin Clark as a young man around age 17 with his head leaning back, smiling at the camera, sitting in a wheelchair. Clark vs. Clark 1982 is still considered one of the most impactful landmark cases that transformed disability rights in Canada. The video switches to a head and shoulder shot of Catherine.
Clark v. Clark, decided by an Ontario County Court in 1982, long before we even imagined a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That case still makes me shiver. Justin Clark was a 2-year-old boy with cerebral palsy when his parents deposited him at the provincial institution. A non-speaking person, Justin was introduced to the communication system known as bliss symbolics at the age of 13 and rapidly became very proficient. When Justin was 18 and said he wanted to leave the institution, a 1-week trial of community living was actually approved by the institution, but vetoed by Justin's parents. Our man Justin didn't quit there. He took his case to court. At trial, experts described him as feeble-minded, incompetent, an imbecile. But Justin took the stand on the 6th and final day of the trial, and he defended himself. It was a first in Canadian legal history to use bliss symbolics to testify. By the end, Justin was drenched in sweat from the physical labor of communicating. But Justin Clark won his battle for freedom.
A photo of Justin Clark appears on the day he won his victory outside the courthouse, in a wheelchair with his head held high, looking upwards, laughing, wearing a white shirt and black tie and sunglasses in front of a large crowd. The photo changes to one of Justin Clark in his mid-30s, head leaned back, smiling at the camera, sitting in a wheelchair. Return to Catherine.
And went on to live just exactly where he pleased for 4 more decades. Justin didn't know he was championing a movement, at least not when he started out. He just wanted a fair shake, and he was willing to put himself on the line for it. For me, Justin Clark embodies the very best of our movement.
Video switches to head and shoulder shot of Ingrid.
A decision which had tremendous impact in recognizing the rights of persons with disabilities was the Eve decision of 1986. Eve was a 24-year-old woman with intellectual disability. Staff at her care facility noticed that Eve was developing a close relationship with another resident, a male resident, who also lived with disability. Eve's mother was concerned about the possibility of Eve becoming pregnant, and therefore requested that the court consent to her being sterilized, in her own best interest, of course. On October 23rd, 1986, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in favor of person over disability and unanimously found that Eve could not be sterilized without her permission. This was a pivotal turning point in affirming that regardless of cognitive disability, all persons have fundamental human rights that cannot be done away with, even under guardianship.
Head and shoulders shot of Yvonne.
And so I now want to turn to Barb Good. Can you tell us about the group that you were involved with at the time of the Eve case?
A black and white photo appears of Barb Good holding a bouquet of flowers outside the Supreme Court on the day the Eve case was won in 1986. Barb speaks.
I was the chairperson of the Consumer Advisory Committee, and how it came about that David Vickers, who was a lawyer he was on the board, I believe, of Canadian Association for the MR. I don't like the word, so MR. So he went to CMR, and then we asked him if he could help us go to the Supreme Court. I was very proud to be involved from the very, very, very beginning, and so were the other two people, and it just meant a lot, and the lawyers, everybody who helped us, it was just awesome. I want people to know that it was not just a women's issue, it's a men's issue too. If you're given the right information in a way you can understand, you should be able to decide on your own. And all 7 judges agreed with us.
Back to Yvonne.
So David Vickers, as you said, was a fabulous, wonderful lawyer. And I remember him telling me that he said to you, well, maybe there's sometimes when a non-therapeutic sterilization is okay. Like maybe sometimes it's okay. And he told me that your group said, absolutely not. It's never a good idea.
Catherine speaks.
You know, when I think about this case, and you and Yvonne have really summed it up well. I mean, you and your colleagues and the people of your organization and your legal team, you guys performed a great service for people with disabilities well into the future. You know, often people don't listen to people with disabilities, especially people with intellectual disabilities. They don't think we have anything important or new to say, and you proved them all wrong. I mean, think about it, Barb. The court listened to you. Those 7 judges, they listened and they heard.
Yvonne.
So I'm really glad that we've had an opportunity to kind of go back to this case, talk about how important it was, because it really was one of the first key disability rights cases.
Ingrid.
Eldridge versus British Columbia, 1997. This case involved several people from the deaf community who argued that the failure to provide sign language interpretation when receiving health care was discriminatory and violated the Canadian Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. One of the appellants was a deaf woman who had given birth prematurely to twins and was not provided with a sign language interpreter. Complications had occurred during the birth that the mother was never made aware of. The Supreme Court of Canada ruled that the government was required to take special measures to ensure that equity-seeking groups like persons from the deaf community and people with disabilities are able to benefit equally from government services.
Yvonne.
And in that case, involving deaf clients who were not able to get sign language interpreting, the court also made an important comment or rule. It said, treating everybody the same does not get equality. You have to take into account people's differences.
Ingrid.
Another case is the Moore versus the Board of Education. Jeffrey Moore, a young man with a learning disability, was denied the benefit of a regular classroom because the school board refused to provide the additional funding needed. The Supreme Court of Canada affirmed the legal rights of students with disabilities to receive an education that gives them an opportunity to develop to their full potential.
Yvonne.
The Jeffrey Moore case, this went to the Supreme Court. A young man with a learning disability was unable to benefit from a regular classroom because the school division refused to provide the additional funds he needed in order to get the services he needed. In fact, he was told to go to a private school instead. And again, the Supreme Court wisely said that everybody in the classroom has the right to have their needs accommodated and to benefit equally. So those are some highlights. There are many, many, many more, but these are some very important key principles that these cases have set out in terms of our understanding of disability equality rights.
Catherine.
Our movement began much like every other emancipatory social movement, with stubborn and gutsy people, with an electrifying idea, and with unstoppable chatter. The people, they were everywhere, in charity fundraisers, segregated classrooms, timeout rooms, and sprawling on the cold, damp bed sheets of homes where we were never welcome. Their individual acts of resistance, with no one cheering them on, those were the sparks of humanity, ready to ignite the radical idea that we all deserved better. That revolutionary idea that we are not diminished by disability, but rather oppressed by forces of law and medicine, by all that is baked into our culture. We came to know the idea by many names, right? Self-determination, human rights, anti-ableism, disability justice. It caught fire. First a whisper, then a roar. There was talking, debating, grapevining, consciousness raising, pennies dropping, long before social media was a thing. It was an explosive recipe. Disabled people surviving, connecting across their solitary deprivations and indignities, figuring out what was wrong with the picture, sharing the idea of liberation, and boom, the disability rights movement began.
Over a white background, dark blue lettering appears. Collective Impact Project, making room for change. The word change is a lighter blue. Disability human rights cases. Content producers, hosts, and editors. Elliot Dewhurst, Dorami Ealing, April Dobbin, Fran Odette, Ingrid Palmer, Doris Rajan, Christopher Sutton, Lori Van Holt, Heather Wakas. Video interviews, Yvonne Peters, Catherine Frazee, Barb Good. English audio description, Corey Stuvey. ASL LSQ captioning and French audio description by Wavefront Center for Communication Accessibility. The Wavefront logo is present. the Collective Impact Project Steering Committee, Autism Alliance of Canada, CCRW, Council of Canadians with Disabilities, Inclusion Canada, L'Arch, Realize, Rick Hansen Foundation, Spinal Cord Injury Canada, and Wavefront Centre for Communication Accessibility. Video production by Eric Nettle and Doris Rajan, with Nettle Media Incorporated. The Government of Canada logo appears with a small Canadian flag over the final A. Funded in part by the Government of Canada's Social Development Partnerships Program, Disability. Copyright 2023, Autism Alliance of Canada, Canadian Council on Rehabilitation and Work, Council of Canadians with Disabilities, Inclusion Canada, L'Arch, Realize, Rick Hansen Foundation, Spinal Cord Injury Canada, Wavefront Centre for Communication Accessibility. All rights reserved. End of video. Fade to black.